morning, Glory America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Well, the president and senior officials are leaving from Quebec soon en route to Singapore. Before we talk about what happened to the G7, or is it the G6 or the G8, I thought I would start with our panel this morning taking a look at China. We've got with us Courtney Kube, who is NBC News national security and Pentagon correspondent. Also, Josh Kraushaar of the National Journal and Ashley Parker of the Washington Post. Courtney, we're lucky to have you. Yesterday you broke a story about what the Chinese are doing in preparation for the Singapore summit. Cue us up on what's going on there.
So a lot of these are surveillance techniques and tactics that the U.S. has seen from the Chinese before, that they do overseas and domestically here in the U.S. But some of the things that American security officials are looking for is the potential that the Chinese will have waiters in restaurants and coffee shops and around the summit location and at the hotel where the delegations are staying. And, you know, if you're out and you're at dinner and you're talking about what happened that day, they might be listening and then they can report back. There's other ways that they've done things that are very covert and sort of, you know, that kind of remind me of Inspector Gadget or 007. You know, pins that they were, the Trump summit in China in November of 2017. The friendship pins, the belief was, well, they could have microphones, listening devices, or tracking devices in them, so you weren't supposed to wear them into a secure area. Those are the kinds of things that they're expecting and anticipating, you know, could happen in Singapore next week.
Now, we see countermeasures in Homeland, right, where they pop up tents in hotel rooms, or on the NFL sidelines, where you've got coaches talking behind the... Is the U.S. undertaking countermeasures?
Yes, absolutely. And so there are already people in Singapore who are preparing the locations for not just where the president and the delegation are going to stay, but also meeting rooms where they might be having sort of side meetings and off, you know, pull-asides and whatnot. The assumption is that if you're anywhere around the summit, there's a potential that there could be cameras in the meeting rooms and whatnot. They are erecting tents. That's one way they can do it. You know, the officials can go inside and read a classified document without any concern that a camera might catch it and get a photo. And then they're warning people, be smart.
People are never smart, though. Ashley Parker, you're a White House correspondent for the Post, and a couple of weeks ago came the story that now new sophisticated listening devices are being around 17th and Pennsylvania that are trying to suck up every electronic signal in the vicinity. What are you doing about that as a reporter who has to live there?
Well, I mean, one thing is, and this is not specific to that, but just in this media environment, and I can't really go into specifics, but the Washington Post, like I imagine just about every other major publication, we take as many precautions as possible, from using encrypted messaging apps to being very careful with our sources, and sometimes for something particularly sensitive, you know, meeting people in person, not doing something over the phone, not doing something over text message or even an encrypted app, and that's for our protection. It's certainly for our source protection, and I can say on some of the more sensitive stories I've worked on, and this is going back to the beginning of the administration, you know, the people we deal with have a similar sense of, I want to say, healthy paranoia, and so it's not quite meeting in parking garages, but is meeting face-to-face, off-site, in person, in a pretty protective, proactive way.
That's the new norm. Josh Kraushaar, on Thursday evening, there were arrests made of a longtime Senate aide who had been allegedly passing important classified information to his girlfriend who was working at the New York Times. This will shake a lot of people up, both on the First Amendment side, what's this happening to a reporter, and on the eye. You know, the Department of Justice is continuing the Obama-era policy, going after reporters.
Yeah, I think you'll see a bipartisan consensus against what the Department of Justice is doing. And it really raises a lot of concerns because a lot of folks said, well, you know, the White House, this Trump administration, is talking tough talk, but they're not taking any actions to match it in terms of its rhetoric and actions towards journalists. Well, this is a big change, and I think this is a chilling effect, and will have a chilling effect in terms of the relationship with this White House and the media.
Right. Stories of the week. Courtney, you and I had the same one. Children at the border. I interviewed Attorney General Sessions at length, pushing him on what I view as a very bad idea of separating children from their parents when they cross. As refugee or seeking asylum at the border, there's a lot of heat coming. Then you followed quickly with a story that you'd been breaking it yourself. Do you think that policy is going to change?
I don't see any signs that it is. And of course, this policy is based on the zero tolerance policy, which is the administration's idea that any time someone comes across the border illegally, they will be referred to Department of Justice for potential prosecution. Well, of course, if you come across the border with a child, the child can't be held in detention, can't go to jail. So the kids are now being sent to HHS, Health and Human Services custody. Well, there were a number of federal facilities where HHS was taking care of these kids. What my colleague Julianne Ainsley and I were reported this week is that turns out that they are at or near capacity, and they're having to look at more facilities now. They're holding more than 11,000 children, and many of them are held for upwards of 45 days before they're turned over to foster care or to a relative or family member who might be here in the United States.
You know, I have this vision of Dickensian workhouses. Mr. Bumble, the beetle from Oliver Twist, in charge of 11,000 children. This is a nightmare waiting to happen.
And it's not just, you know, I think we have in our heads that these are kids who might be 10, 12, 14, whatever. There are infants. There are babies that are being, and young kids. And this was a much bigger undertaking for HHS than even they expected. So now we're seeing that they may end up having to put some of them at military bases, at other federal facilities in Texas. And the question is, can they continue to provide the necessary medical care and food and safe lodging that will be necessary for these thousands of kids?
They've got to change this policy. Ashley, what is your story of the week over there at the Washington Post?
So we just reported that Joe Hagan, who is a deputy chief of staff at the White House and has sort of been the White House's point person on the ground in Singapore, is going to be leaving the White House shortly after the summit. He's someone who the general public has heard about. A lot of people probably couldn't pick out of a lineup even, but he's someone who, his departure is relevant for a couple of reasons. He's someone who has been controversial within the White House. On the one hand, a number of people, he comes with a lot of experience from the Bush administration. A lot of people who are sort of nervous about President Trump point to him as an adult in the room, sort of a savvy, responsible person making grown-up and responsible decisions. So they're going to be sad to see him go. Among other people, there's a sense that Hagan was a Bush loyalist and not really a Trump loyalist, and that created some dissension. Some people, Trump loyalists, circulated a joking meme that it looked like a campaign banner. It said, "Hagan, make America Bush again." So not something the president exactly loves. But basically, his departure is just another example of the president removing people, or the people who don't quite fit in leaving on their own accord, and likely being replaced with someone who is more ideologically, temperamentally aligned with the president, and also probably has a bit better personal chemistry.
Interesting. Josh Kraushaar, your story of the week?
California elections, big midterm primaries, and Democrats can breathe a sigh of relief because they got all their candidates through into the November election, which was a real concern that some of these candidates could have gotten shut out in primaries. But I will add a word of warning. There's some very liberal candidates that actually did win the nomination. The Democrats had to focus on just getting a candidate through. They didn't tend to focus on the best candidates in some of these districts. So there's a candidate who's for single payer in a very conservative leaning South California seat. And there's also a lot of outsiders, a lot of people who haven't been vetted politically. So you have this energy.
And the Republicans picked up young Kim in Ed Royce's seat, and down in Diane Harkey in the seat being vacated by Darrell Issa, their best candidates.
Two women, Republicans, women, moderates, at least on the case of young Kim. So these are candidates that are going to make these races very competitive. It's still very worth watching.
Thank you all. Josh Kraushaar, Courtney Kube, thanks for being here. Ashley Parker, thanks for joining us from the Post. Coming up, I'm going to ask Arizona's Governor Doug Ducey how he plans to make our schools safer. I'll be right back.